What's up guys, today's deck profile is going to be on Valentina, the Princess of Love. This deck is really awesome and I kind of had a bunch of ideas for this with a million different color combinations, but I decided to go with the one I thought was the best, which is blue-green. It's more to open a really cool side deck idea in my opinion for something that I'll get into when I do show off the side deck, but for now let me just show you guys the list and explain as I go. So Valentina is an awesome ruler. She's 2 blue to J-activate, and she has another effect that's activate, pay 2 blue, and you may put a water resonator with total cost 2 or less from your hand into the field. Note that does not trigger the enter effect for cards like Cheshire, but it will work on stuff like Hanzo. So if it actually has the enter text, it won't work, and if it just has when this card enters the field, it will work. This is really cool because it makes the deck play kind of like what 6 Ages played like, where you could just kind of keep your stones open and make sure you have whatever you need available, and then if you don't, you just drop a Resonator. And giving everything water quick cast is actually really insane, because with the new edition of Cinderella, which is essentially an 8/8 on enter, if you drop Cinderella and block on anything turn 2, it's most likely going to die. That can even kill a Lancelot. So I think that effect is extremely underrated, and it's what makes Valentina so great. Let alone how amazing her J-Ruler side is. So on her J-Ruler side, when she enters, you get a Magic Stone, so she makes up for not having that Magic Stone when you J-activate. And you prevent all damage to this card during your turn. So in a situation where you've J-activated her and you want to start swinging, of course the turn after, because there's no Leviathan in this deck, so I don't have Swiftness. But she's just really nice to know that you can force block stuff with Glepnir, and then when you attack it, you take no damage, so they can't like finish her off with Thunder or Flame. And she also gets 100 attack for every card in your hand, and the whole purpose of this deck is at least have 5, so she's permanently going to be a 10/10, and she can't take any damage. She gets a Magic Stone, so that's all already great, and then on top of that, she has her God ability, which is Chains of Love, and it costs 2 blue and 2 colorless, and you gain control of a target Resonator that your opponent controls, and you can do this once per game. And this is actually amazing because in my Arla deck when I was playing against my friend who uses Valentina, I would always have like, let's say, one rested Gwyber from the turn before, and then I set up a new one. And he would just steal my recovered Gwyber and then attack into the other Gwyber, and since it has flying, I can't block. And it's really cool to think that for the cost of 4 mana, you took out 2 of my 5-drop cards. So it's really powerful. You can always do so much with this. You can steal something like a Blazer, the Eater of Dimensions, or just there's so much. It's almost like force removal too. The only minus that I see about that effect is if you're playing as something that has Leviathan as their Regalia, they can technically just boost their J-Ruler and then recover it by banishing the Resonator that you're trying to steal. And because they do it in the chase and it resolves backwards, your target would just kind of fizzle and just disappear. I mean, it's still paying 4 to just get rid of the card, so it's better than nothing, but it is something you should definitely be aware of. Don't let them bait you into trying to steal their biggest monster and using up your mana if they're just going to sack it. Try to kind of play around it the best you can. So yeah, that's just Valentina as a ruler. And then for the stones, I decided to run 1 little red, the Pure Stone. This is mainly also for the side because I side Little Red, the True Fairy Tale. Not to mention that I found 5 special stones okay if you're siding split, like I did in my Arla deck. And so instead of an Almir's, I just have a Little Red. And then for the rest of the Magic Stones, I have 4 Magic Stone of Deep Wood. This is of course because it's blue-green. I do have deep blue in here, and I wanted to have green stones as well as the deep blue because I have Zeke's and it takes 2 greens, and just in case I didn't get to my deep blues as fast as I should, I didn't want to not be able to use any of those cards. With Arla it was fine because any problem card I could just put on the bottom with Percival, but I don't have any light in this, so I don't have that access to that. So I figured I might as well play in a way where I always have the stone lineup perfect. And then of course with Zeke's, if the other 5 of these turn green also, it just gives you a lot more options to use whatever you want, because there is green Resonators in here too. So you can always use the green actual card for, you know, the cat, leaving 2 of these open maybe, because I have familiars in here. And let's say if you leave 2 of these open, even though you have deep blue, your opponent might kind of just think, oh, it's safe to summon something because they only have water open, and they might not pay attention that you have deep blue and it's just kind of like a free Zeke. So sometimes it's nicer to leave this stuff open if you kind of want to bait them into something and have them think that you don't have something to counter. But typically I just wanted to make sure the mana curve is always right, so I put in the 4 green blues even though I had deep blue. For the Resonators, I'm running 3 Alice's Little Scout. Just like in my Arla deck, I think this card is incredible. The fact that it replaces itself on destruction is just great, and you can thin your deck out by pulling it out with Deep Blue. What makes it really awesome in this deck too is because we have the Shangri-La field spell that gives everything 100-100 or 200-200. This can actually get quite big. If you have 2 field spells up and 5 cards in your hand, it's a 6/6 that you can just search for 2 and draw for 1. So I think it's just incredible to be able to just thin your deck and have something that's so strong. And if if this gets to something like 6/6 and you block a Lancelot, you're even getting to draw a card. So it's just really cool. It keeps replacing your hand so that you always have 5 cards in your hand for the field spell. Same with Cheshire. Cheshire can actually get extremely big in this deck too. I've had 4 field spells up, and at that point it's getting 800 attack and 1000 defense, which is ridiculous for a card that can't be targeted. I mean, with Glepnir also, you can just force them to have to block with, like, they're really, like, I've played against my friend, and I've had my Angels up, and one of them is the Dignified Seraph, which is 8/8, and he just forced it to block with Glepnir, and then attacked with Cheshire, and not only does the Cheshire live because it's 1000 defense, but that's, like, such a troll move. I mean, I had to set up my whole Angel by summoning a level 5 and then pulling out the level 4, and he just goes Cheshire attack, and it's so powerful, and I just think that the field spell is really underrated. 3 familiar, I wanted to fit 4, but I didn't like that it didn't get pumped from the field spell because it only pumps water cards. This is still kind of like an emergency card that still nets you a draw, so your hand size stays very well, but it also removes stuff like, Percival and Gretel, which I feel like is good. Not only can you just block them, but with Gretels you can force pop them so that if they do have a cake zone for your next play, at least they don't get to draw off of it, which I think is really great. 3 Cinderellas. This is one of the main cards I really love in this deck. Being able to quick cast this with Valentina's effect on the ruler side is just extremely powerful. I mean, dropping an 8/8 and then blocking something and then being able to just return this to your hand. If you, let's say you have now 4 stones the turn after, like that was turn 3, you drop this and block. Turn 4 you can add it to your hand, leave 2 open. If you have Deep Blue, you can just end your turn, let's say, and then at this point, if they summon something, you can Zeeks. If they don't summon something and try to attack again, you could just drop Cinderella again. It's just so powerful, and there's so much you could do with it that I've just fallen in love with this card. I think it's one of the great best cards in the format right now. And then 2 Hanzos. Hanzo's great because it has flying. I wanted to go over Hanzo instead of Squire of the Ocean Lady or Little Mermaid or anything, specifically because of the flying. I think the fact that it can block stuff like Angels or Gwyber or anything like that is just extremely powerful. I mean, not to mention that with 2 field spells, it becomes a 7/7, and that's extremely big for a flyer that's just 2-drop. That's like Alice's stats, and that's just incredible in my opinion. I think, let alone how fast you could get up to 4 field spells on the field, because I do run 4. It's going to be 11/11, and that only is matched by a Gwyber, and it could block like a Blazer. So to be able to just drop something for the price of 2, block one of the biggest Resonators in the game, and you even got to draw off of it is just really great. And then I have a couple 1-ofs. I have a 1-inch boy. This is kind of just something that I wanted to test. I didn't want to try more than one of it, but I think just one is kind of perfect. What 1-inch boy does is whenever this card deals damage to a Resonator, you destroy it. So if you're in a situation where you might not have the field spells, or you don't really have much going on your field and they're kind of getting too much advantage with aggro, like with Lancelots and stuff, if you drop this and block a Lancelot, it just dies. And I mean, your Resonator dies too, but it's kind of a fair trade, because I mean, I'd much rather pay 2 to kill a Lancelot than have to either force a Cinderella to lose a counter on it or something. I think 1-inch boy is just great to have. Not to mention there's just so much that you can even, let's say, if they have a flyer and you can't block it, let's say a Gwyber, and they attack with their whole field and you just let it go through, during their end phase you can drop the 1-inch boy, and then if they're all rested on your turn, you could just attack into something and kill it. So even against flyers, it has a lot of usages if you play it right, and I think that's great. 1 Medusa. Medusa I didn't like at first because I think her stats are very mediocre. 6/6 I think is really small for a 3-drop, but the fact that I have the field spells in this makes me kind of totally fine with that. Not to mention she can pump herself by 2/2. It's just really great because this card shuffles cards back into the main deck. Once again, if you play this and they have something like a Blazer, it forces them to not be able to attack because they're just going to get shuffled back in. If you have 2 field spells out, it's 1,000, so it's out of Flames range. There's just so much you could do with this card. I mean, and even at that point, if it's outside of Flames range and they try to attack, or if you try to attack in a Gwyber, and you could just shuffle everything back in, and it's just so great. Note that with this card, you don't have to actually go into the battle part of the battle phase. So it says whenever this card blocks or is blocked by a Resonator, put that Resonator on the bottom of the owner's main deck. That literally means before damage. So it's not like you both die and then they get shuffled in or whatever, or you know, they take damage, survive the attack, and then get shuffled in. It's literally the second you've blocked me, you're gone, or I block you, you're gone. There's no actual damage that occurs. So that's really ridiculous as an effect. It solves so many cards, like especially for Blazer, which I think is really strong. Because right now a lot of people are trying Blazer the Ruler, and then they have Blazer the Eater of Dimensions, and they'll just kind of discard it with all their Guinevere's, and then remove it with Arthur, and then bring it back later. And I just think it's so much more powerful to be able to just put that in the bottom of their deck, and all that setup just kind of goes down the drain. So other than that, I also have one Etna. Etna in this deck is a lot stronger than it is in Arla's. I love it in Arla's deck and I wouldn't replace it with anything, but in this deck, the fact that it becomes a 9/9 with the field spell means it's right outside of Flame's range, which I think is insane. If you can't Flame Etna, and it only costs, well, initially it's 3, but I always at least pay 5 for it, which is the same as like Hamlin. I just feel like on enter it does more than what Hamlin does, and I think it's safer to tap 2 down, have 9/9 as stats, which also lets you right outside of Betavir's range, by the way. If you do get 2 field spells, of course she's not outside of the range, but it's totally fine. It's just like a, you know, if you're out of the range, you are. If not, you're not. But she's a 9/9 that also discards a card from their hand. And with Glepnir being on the field to force block their Resonators, if you attack with the Cheshire and force them to block and they're rested, and this can now go through, and everything else on their field will be rested because of course you summoned this the turn prior. It's just so strong to be able to just control their field. And if you're in a situation where, let's say, you have Valentina and Etna, every time you do damage with Valentina to a J-Ruler or the player, Glepnir lets you draw a card, and then Etna makes them discard. So you're plussing so much faster than they can keep up, and the resources just go completely down the drain. And then lastly, I have one Purplemist. I wanted to play more of this, but I knew that if I had them dead in my hand, it was going to start kind of going against the whole hand limit. I mean, of course, if it's stuck there, it's still adding to the count, but I wanted cards that continuously replace themselves, like Cheshires and Familiars and Hanzos and stuff like that. So I figured with just one of this, I would still see it because I draw so much, but it wouldn't kind of just get stuck in my hand and double up too soon. And I think this card is just great because being a 5 cost almost helps it, and I feel like that's going to sound really weird to some people because of course the less you can pay for a card, the better, but I think it just makes the pacing of the deck very good. Valentina's effect costs 4, and to deactivate her it costs 2, but she gets a stone on enter. So in a situation where you're both kind of evenly matched and you have the same amount of resources, you can deactivate for 2, you get a stone on enter, you then pay 4 to steal their Resonator, and let's say attack into their other Resonator. At this point, if those 2 Resonators, let's say, died, and you're kind of in the advantage now, and now on their turn, they use their resources to kill Valentina, and they're kind of low, and then the turn after that, you drop a Purplemist, I feel like there's nothing they can do to respond to that. This card, with at least 2 field spells, is a 14/14, which is totally outside of Gwyber's attack range. You can't target it at all. There's just nothing you can really do to it. I mean, cards like Dark Pulse don't work against it. They're not going to use Cinderella with 7 cards to be able to sack it. They would have to attack into it with just so much to get rid of it. And with a bunch of Cheshires on the field that also can't be targeted and are just chump blockers, I think there's really nothing they can do to get over it after a situation like that. You can just drop this card at the perfect time and it's just game. There's no way to respond to something that can't be targeted that's this strong and has that much for stats. And I mean, even just 2 field spells is enough. As long as it's outside of Gwyber's attack range, I think you're totally fine. And it literally just means you're going to win the game. Moving on to the spells, first up is Glepnir. Glepnir is the Regalia for Valentina. The first effect says when you deal battle damage with your J-Ruler, you draw a card, or if you do damage to a J-Ruler, you draw a card. And that's always really great because you can force them to block all your other Resonators with Cheshires and using Glepnir, because the second effect is target J-Resonator your opponent controls gains this turn, this card must block if able. So you can force them to block your Cheshires. If there are a lot of weaker cards, you actually get to take them out with the Cheshires because they get really buffed up. And then you attack directly with Valentina and draw a card. And then the last effect is discard another card named Glepnir to draw a card. That's actually insane because unless they have Maribel, you never want to hold on to a second one really anyway, unless you really want to force a lot of their stuff to block. And just having to thin your deck by just discarding these and getting new cards is just incredible. The second Regalia is just 3 deep blues. The red card I have is Banzai Attack, and it costs 4, so I know it's not something I'm going to have to need red for early. And with all the draw power, I felt like having access to this should be really easy. Not to mention that you don't really need to pitch it for the last effect where you can produce green, blue, or red on discard, because the deck doesn't really need too much mana to work. And so I didn't want to run 4 and have way too many copies in my hand, because then it might just be sitting there kind of dead. And 3 I felt like I can still double up on the field if I want to just add 2 Ally Scouts to my hand once I have the mana open for it. So I felt like 3 would be just fine. 4, Shangri-La, the Paradise on the Ocean. This is the main card I've been talking about this whole time. It's when this card enters your field, draw a card. It's the first field spell that actually replaces itself, and I think that's incredible because what a lot of people don't notice is that if you play a deck that has a lot of buff cards, you often fall kind of behind, because if you're spending all this resource to make your 1 Resonator or 2 Resonators really strong and they're dealt with, you're now left with not only no Resonators, but all the cards you use to buff them are now also gone. So what makes this card so good is once you use it, you draw a card, so it replaces itself, and it just blankly gives everything a buff without having to actually target because it's a field. So not only, like, let's say turn 1 you go Cheshire and you use Glepnir and you end your turn. On their turn, let's say they're playing green and they drop something like Familiar, or if they're playing, let's say, like my Arla deck, blue-white, they drop Percival, or a light deck that drops Percival, and you know, they add something to their hand. Let's say it's even Arla and they add the bow to the hand, play the bow and end turn. On your turn, you use 2 and use Shangri-La, and your Cheshire is now 200 attack because you have 5 cards in your hand. The second effect is, the last effect is, as long as you have 5 cards in your hand, it gives another 100, so it's 2/2 if you have 5 or more cards in your hand. And then your Cheshire attacks, you force the Percival to block with Glepnir, you attack it with Cheshire and it dies and your Cheshire stays alive because it's 2/4. That's just ridiculous to me. I mean, early game you can take so much out with Cheshires, especially if you're getting a lot of these on the field early, and they can't do anything about it. I mean, having to either waste a removal card on something that's maybe a little bigger like Cinderella is totally fine, because you can even pay 2 to return it to your hand if you have it open. And they, even in the situation I explained, they can't shoot an arrow at Cheshire because it can't be targeted. So it's just so incredible to me that this card actually replaces itself, because there's just so much it adds to the deck. And then 3 Foresees. In a situation where I might get like Etna and Purplemist, or Etna and 1-Inch Boy, or any of those kind of combinations of cards that don't let me draw in my hand, I want to be able to get back to 5 cards really quickly. This also helps against the dark matchup. If they use something like Spiral on you and you go down to 4 cards, on your draw you would have 5, then you would use this and you would have 6, and then at that point, even if you play a card, you still have 5. So I think Foresee is really good because you don't want to have a bad matchup against dark that's normally discarding your hand quite often. If the whole deck revolves around having 5 cards in your hand, you want to make sure you have that no matter what your matchup is. And then 1 Glimpse of Kaguya. Once again, this is mainly for dark. It works against all decks. It's really good against stuff like Guinevere also, but it cancels an activate ability, which counts as a god ability like I mentioned in the Arla video. And so if you're going against like a Resard and they try to go crazy and use their god ability to just wipe out your field and discard your hand, and you glimpse that, there's no way he's coming back from that. He's been setting up to have that played the entire game. Or something like Foresee, where she ramps all early game to then get to her god ability and storm the field with the 4 Sacred Beasts. If you cancel something like that, there's no way they're coming back from that, especially if you just next turn go, you're forced to block with your Foresee, attack it with Valentina, you don't take any damage and it just dies. That's just insane. So I think Glimpse of Kaguya is really good this format. And then 2 Keen Sense, once again, no Gretel, so I'd rather run this over Cake Zone because it does destroy target's chance standby area cards, so it's kind of like a why not since it also cancels target spells. And 2 Zeeks. I only ran 2 because I was still worried that if I ran 3 I'd see it a little too early. Maybe I would mulligan one away and see a second one really early, and I don't want to risk not hitting the 2 blue-greens that early on. So I figured if I open deep blue and a Zeeks, it's fine to keep it, but I wouldn't want to have it at 3 and just see too much of it. So in this situation with 2, I don't always see it in my opening hand. It kind of comes up really early when I start drawing, and that's totally fine. I don't really want it way too early, so I thought just 2 would be fine. And then like I mentioned earlier, 2 Banzai Attacks is my last card. I didn't want to rely fully on the field spell and just Valentina to be winning the game, or even Purplemist. I figured worst case scenario, if they're siding in something that's destroying my field spell, maybe they're using green and they're countering my field spells, and my Purplemist, let's say, gets Zeeked, or my Valentina can't get enough damage in. I wanted to still make sure all those low drops of Familiars and Cheshires and little scouts and stuff were all still very valuable. So I figured that if I get them all on the field and I use Banzai Attack, I'm still getting an insane amount of damage in, if not winning the game. I've never really used Banzai Attack and not won the game. And there's also some fire-sided in the deck, so it just goes really well with it. There's like splits and stuff, so if this doesn't somehow kill them, the split's going to, unless you're using monostones or something, which I haven't seen a deck that uses all monostones just yet now, so hitting for split for like even 1200 I think is fine. So yeah, that's kind of just a spell lineup. Lastly, for the side deck, I have a Little Red the True Fairy Tale. This is why I wanted to run the whole blue-green engine. I thought people wouldn't see the switch coming. I think it's a totally fair trade because the thing that makes Little Red so great is that because you're still only running so little stones of, special stones, you can still have the splits in instead of the Glepnirs if you choose to. There's just so much you can take out the Glepnirs for if you don't want to keep them in. I think it's still not so bad to keep, but just in case you wanted to or you felt like it wasn't doing much or they had Mary Bells. Going into this means that they can't use Blazer on it since it can't be targeted. They'd still be able to J-activate for free, but like I said, if you have this on the field, you mostly J-activate it because you have a bunch of field spells. And if you have a bunch of field spells and you did keep Glepnir and they J-activate Blazer and they can't attack that turn, I'm pretty sure next turn you can easily just go Glepnir, force Blazer to block, and then just attack into it with an Alice Scout. This thing would be 10-10 with 2 of the field spell. I mean, just imagine this being 10-10 and just being like poke and Blazer just dying, and then this dies and you draw a card. So there's just so much that the 4-4 you would get from the field spell does for you in this deck. And like I said, normally I don't like cards that strictly go on buffing, but the fact that it replaces itself makes this actually so good because there's no investment in using Little Red in this deck. You don't miss out on anything. You easily just play the deck you would normally, and then she gives you something later on once you J-activate. So it feels really powerful to know that not only is Banzai Attack going to be a 1400 boost, but all those field spells are now 400 boost. And if you don't have 5 cards in your hand, it's a 200 boost, which is what you were aiming to have normally anyway. And being safe from Blazer is also really amazing too. And I think that's just really good. I don't have any Rap Rats in this deck also because, even in the side, because it's 2 to play Raffrat and then you J-activate for free, or you could just pay the 3 to J-activate her, and I'm totally fine with just paying the 3 to J-activate her. I'm not going to be doing it crazy early anyway, so it's totally fine to cost 3. It's not too much. And yeah, I think a Little Red is just amazing in this deck. And then I went with one Alice, the Saint of Healing. Why I think this card is also really good is because it makes all the Resonators you have that already have really good attack from the field spell and really good defense from the field spell also now have a lot of defense, so they're going to be winning most of the battles. Not to mention it can make stuff untargetable. I wanted to use this because I was worried that if I went against a deck with a lot of removal, it was just going to be too much to keep up with and I was going to have not enough Resonators on the field. So I figured being safe from protection, being able to buff their defense, and then her God ability, which not only lets you draw 3 cards, which is insane, but makes everything you control untargetable, just kind of made it like I wanted to use at least 1 in the side for sure. There was no way I wasn't going to not side this ruler, and it's just does so much. And then 1 Blazer, this is the one I pulled from my box opening, so I kind of like it. It was kind of like, I never really liked Blazer as a ruler, but now that I have a stamp one that I actually pulled, I actually kind of like him, so hi Blazer. But yeah, Blazer is just really good because he kills J-Rulers. This deck would have a really bad matchup against stuff like Bahamut if they were still out, so I still have the Blazer and the Regalias. It just makes it really safe against anything like Melgus Kane or Bahamut. I don't want to lose to something that I was losing to all last format, so I wanted to just be prepared for it, especially because the side didn't really demand too much space. 4 splits. I like 4 in this because you want to be able to do as much damage as you can, especially if you know you can use this if you side in the Alice. She can search deep blue, so you always have the red, and she'd come and rested, which is fine because she's not doing much in recovered anyway because her defense is just really high. This is also really good in Little Red because you're doing so much damage early, so even any damage from this could just pick them off super easily. And I wanted to have access to 4 because the deck is a little slower sometimes, and I'd rather just get chunks of damage out as fast as I can. And then 2 Credo. I don't have light for the Lumias, so I'd much rather just have something that helps fight against Vlad outside of those splits and all the buffs anyway. I didn't want to not have anything at all, so I figured I'd just have 2 of this since I don't have light for Lumia. And 2 Flame King Shout. This is just against, like, if you want something like a mirror match with something close to Valentina that has a bunch of Cheshires and stuff, it's going to suck for, even though you can force them to block, you can't get any damage actually in. And for their Cheshires to just constantly be attacking, blocking your Cheshires, even if they don't have the field spell and you're just not getting damage in, it would really, really suck. So I figured that having something to board wipe all those little drops and then making them force block with their higher Resonators is totally fine. And you can actually get some damage in early game so that the splits do kill them, or you know, if it's just something that you didn't decide the splits into, you could just actually get some damage in with Little Red or whatever it may be. So I thought having the 2 Flame King Shout to make it really good. So thanks for watching, guys. That was my Valentina, the Ruler of Paradise's deck profile. If you guys do have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. I hope you guys like the new way I'm doing things, where I just have the list in the description, which, by the way, the list is in the description if you guys didn't notice and you want the list. I've been trying to make it kind of just taking advice from everyone to make sure everyone's pleased with how I do the videos. I would feel really bad if someone's just not enjoying them or has to go through more work to kind of understand the cards or anything like that. So if you do have any advice, let me know. If you like how things are going, let me know also, so I know to keep doing certain things that I'm doing. And if you guys haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do, because I have another deck profile coming Friday, which it looks like it's going to be Machina, because that one was really highly voted too. And then 5 more deck profiles coming next week. And I'll catch you guys next time.